Hello everyone, George from Ireland, and here I am in front of the United Kingdom's Holocaust Memorial Garden. It's very small, it's very modest, and simple, and perhaps appositely somber in view of what it's about. It's got a quotation there from the Bible, from the book of Lamentations. Well, I'll get closer to read it for you. So, for these I weep, streams of tears flow from my eyes because of the destruction of my people. So this simple rock here, it was put up in about 2005, if memory serves. Anyway, it's one of the only memorials in the United Kingdom to something which didn't happen in the UK. So the Holocaust, well, what was it? Just in case anybody doesn't know, or Shoah, is that how I say it in Hebrew? Anyway, it's obviously the National Socialist government in Germany. It's their policy whereby they murdered millions of Jewish people, probably around 6 million Jewish people, and lots of other people as well. Obviously, it depends who you consider being Holocaust victims as well. You could talk about all the victims of the Third Reich, but various political prisoners killed, particularly communists, if they're from Germany or other countries. Lots of civilians, Polish citizens, whether they're Jewish or Gentile. About 6 million of them were killed. Half of them Gentiles, half of them Jewish. And lots of civilians in Soviet countries like Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and so forth. Homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, mentally and physically disabled people as part of Action T4, which began even before the Second World War, gypsies, and on. Various other dissidents like pacifists. So what is this word Holocaust? Well, it's an ancient Greek word, it's meaning totally burnt. The hollow is the totally bit, and the coarse is the burnt. That's in the English word caustic. So obviously been anti-Semitism around in Christendom more or less since the beginning, despite the fact that the Jewish people, well, some of them were the apostles and the early Christians. Jesus was Jewish, obviously sent Peter, all the 12 apostles, and all the rest of it. Why didn't Hitler invade Ireland? Good question. I'm not aware he had any plan to, or any plan to invade the West whatsoever. I know he was a very evil man, but that doesn't prove that he wanted to invade Occidental Europe. And indeed, at enormous cost, he'd built up the Siegfried Line, these defences in Western Germany, which suggests that he didn't intend to attack France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Didn't even seem to talk about retaking Alsace-Lorraine in private. Certainly wanted to attack the Eastern Europe. If you read Mein Kampf saying we must end the perpetual German march to the south and the west and turn our eyes to the east, principally towards Russia and the border states subject to her. So wanted to get Lebensraum, living space in Eastern Europe. This was Drang nach Osten, urge to the east, and desire to enthrall the peoples of Eastern Europe, to just have them as a reservoir of slave labor and to plunder their natural resources. So they pillaged countries. So the astonishing thing about the Holocaust in Germany is well, how good the situation had been for Jewish people until 1933. They'd had equality before law for almost a century in almost all parts of Germany, and well integrated, been there for many centuries. So they're completely assimilated. The average German wouldn't know them from Adam, might go to a synagogue, but apart from 1 hour of the week, could be completely part of the mainstream Jewish German community. Obviously, there's some Jewish people who are more isolated, Haredim and so on, who kept mainstream society at arm's length, and lived in a particularly Jewish quarter, and were very strictly observant of kosher rules and so forth, only eating kashrut. And there are obviously shades in between that. So there have been Jewish people who've been very wealthy, who've been appointed to high positions. There was always anti-Semitism in Germany, but until 1933, not that severe. The Nazis were a lunatic fringe group in the late 1920s, only about 2% of the vote. And there were even Jewish people in some of the other right-wing parties. The Nazis, I'm not saying they were right-wing, a bizarre blend of right and left. Let's not use it as a stick with which to beat mainstream right-wing parties these days. But let's say Gustav Stresemann, leader of the DNVP, one of the major conservative parties in Germany, he was married to a Jewess. But in 1933, the Nazis came to office and they began to kick their anti-Semitic policy into high gear. Even they, in their 25-point party program, had talked about expelling Jewish people who'd entered the country since the First World War began, or things like that, or removing them from national life. So quickly bringing in racist discrimination against Jewish people. And it became more and more severe, obviously. So a multi-stage process of vilification, constantly demonizing them through the media, through education and so forth, or miseducation perhaps I should call it, and then separating Jewish people, obviously having to make them wear the yellow star, not permitting them to go to parks and swimming pools and so on. The Jim Crow laws in a sense. And you've got to remember that racial discrimination was not unique to Germany by law in those days. Many states in the United States had racist discrimination by law, and not just erstwhile Confederate states. Within the British Empire, South Africa and Zimbabwe, it was then called Rhodesia, they had racist laws, and so on, or the Italian colonies discriminated by law, and so forth. But anyway, it tended to be colour discrimination. Here was one group of whites discriminating against another group of whites, and white supremacists tend not to think the Jewish people aren't white, even when they actually are. And now, it doesn't matter to me who's white or not. No one should be discriminated against on the basis of ethnicity or faith, and obviously skin tone should have nothing to do with it. So one thing about this talk is in no wise Teutonophobic. I don't want German people to be mistreated either. And obviously you can be both German and Jewish by ethnicity or citizenship or culture or anything like that. Yeah, the situation deteriorated very rapidly indeed. That's what's so shocking about it. And obviously by 1936, the Jewish community was severely discriminated against. By the time the Second World War broke out, 2/3 of them had moved abroad, had to pay a big fine to do so. About 100 Jewish men murdered on Kristallnacht, the 9th of November 1938, anniversary of the Beer Hall Putsch. It was supposedly reprisal for the murder of Ernst von Rath, this German diplomat in Paris, by Herschel Grinspan, a Polish Jew. But there might have been part of some sort of homosexual relationship gone wrong. Anyway, what else about the Holocaust? So then, obviously, it began in earnest with the Wannsee Conference in Berlin. This idyllic house beside a lake just outside Berlin in January 1942, where 24 senior Nazis met and planned the Holocaust very rapidly. All records were supposed to be destroyed, but one of them was kept in an archive and discovered after the Second World War. I've been to the house where it took place. You can see a film about it called Conspiracy, which takes place in real time, because the meeting took 2 hours, the film takes 2 hours. They use the minute of the meeting to write the script. Obviously the minute doesn't record every word, so they had to fill in the blanks with a bit of imagination. And that's that. And there had already been several large-scale massacres of Jewish people in Eastern Europe and Poland, in the occupied Soviet Union by Germany. Now, I should point out that when I say Poland, obviously it was under German illegal occupation at the time. Some Poles get very exercised about this, think that someone's blaming Polish people for this, and I'm not suggesting that. Obviously there were a handful of Polish people who took part. I'm not saying most Poles are guilty of this in any way, and I'm not saying even most German people were guilty of it. I don't want to demonize a whole country, so a whole country is guilty of something, as though that Germans should be mistreated today. I absolutely don't believe that, because that's just racism in another direction. So anyway, 6 million Jewish people murdered, often killed in extermination camps like Auschwitz. And obviously Holocaust Memorial Day is in January, recording in January 1945, when the Red Army liberated it. That's the Soviet army. What else should I point out? Yeah, not enough was done. News of this leaked out. Some people escaped. Some very gallant man even broke in to come to one of these extermination camps. I don't know how he did it, to come back out with evidence, telling the Allies, asking them to bomb the railways so not so many people could be brought to these extermination camps, so they couldn't be killed so fast, because it was just the logistics of killing so many people was quite challenging. The Third Reich had used these gas fans, poisoning people, using the carbon monoxide to poison them. In Romania, the fascist dictator there, Ion Antonescu, he'd begun this, or trapping people in trains, packing them in very, very densely, and going on very, very slow journeys in the height of summer, so they'd try and die of asphyxiation and heat and thirst and so on. So many people murdered so barbarously. And I met a woman from Moldova who's a Holocaust survivor who later moved to Canada. I met a British guy called Jimmy James, an RAF officer who spent some time in Sachsenhausen in that concentration camp. Now, he wasn't treated badly. He said his rations were short and he was freezing half the time, but he was never brutalized. But other people were. There was Station Z, as in end of the alphabet, that's the end of the line, queuing people up and shooting them in a room there. Because until the Holocaust began in earnest in 1942, they'd use Einsatzgruppen, and they continued to use them a bit after that. So German soldiers and police officers to shoot dead Jewish civilians. And there were about 3,000 of them, and they killed obviously tens of thousands of people. But even some of the Einsatzgruppen, even some of those who'd volunteered for this, found it actually quite difficult to bring themselves to do this, to kill unarmed people, to kill women and children, including infants. Some of them vomited, had nightmares about it. It troubled their conscience. So they said, well, we'll find a sort of more mechanized, more industrial way of murdering people. So that's that. I mean, I'm trying to be objective about it, but I hope I'm not being too unemotional, because it's just obviously just beyond my ken, even on such an enormous scale. So I clash with white supremacists and neo-Nazis online sometimes. These anti-Semites are sometimes telling me that the Holocaust did not happen, and in the next breath that it was a good thing that it did happen, and it's only a pity it wasn't completed. So obviously after the Second World War, Israel was founded. Obviously there are many reasons for Zionism, but one of them is, if we want not safe in Germany, we'll never be safe anywhere. You can say, well, you can move to the United States, for example. Say, well, we don't know that, because the situation could deteriorate very, very quickly, just like it did in Germany. We thought we were safe there. In 1933 we were. Within 9 years, the Holocaust had begun. So that is just a little bit barely scratching the surface of what the Holocaust is, and there are very few Holocaust survivors still left alive. And I've seen testimony from some of them. And then obviously there's this worrying attack on historical truth. People trying to erase the memory of the Holocaust. And in Israel, there's a project to try and discover the names of so many of the victims, saying every name recorded is one small victory against this bid to annihilate the Jewish people. And it's obviously tristful to think that there were thriving Jewish communities in many Eastern European countries which is wiped out. Obviously, so many of them killed in the Holocaust, some of them moved to Israel afterwards, or there are other countries where after the formation of Israel, people were driven out. They were driven out of Egypt and Syria. There are virtually no Jewish people there left. These countries had millennia of Jewish history, which is an awful pity. Well, obviously, I would wish we'd obviously set aside religious and racial hatred and live in peace. There's some sort of Hebrew song, what a wonderful world it would be if men would brothers be, something like that. Anyway, so that's just my penny's worth on the Holocaust, on what it is and why it's important to remember it. Obviously, genocide anywhere, no matter who commits it, is detestable, and to be opposed to these words, they might seem almost worthless. They're so glib, they're so trite when speaking about such a profound matter. So sorry, excuse me for my weak and foolish words. I hope I could find something more worthy to say about such an important topic. All right, so goodbye everyone, toodaloo.